Good morning, David.
Morning, Michael.
Firstly, can I say I'm really pleased to have you on this podcast this morning. I'm really interested to listen to what you have to say. And firstly, you can kick it off by just introducing yourself to our listeners. Say a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Okay, thanks, Michael. I'm pleased to be here as well. My name's David Sales. I currently run my own company. I'm managing director of my own company called First Ascent. But my background started about 25 years ago when I left university. I joined BT and I moved through a range of sales and marketing positions in my early sort of 10 years there. I went off to do an MBA, came back to BT, where I started to run sort of standalone businesses within the company, one of which was BT Conferencing, which I think we'll probably come back to, and then some other startup organisations within BT. About 3 years ago, I left BT to run my own company because I'd become passionate about the subject of leadership, and so that's what I'm doing now.
Building on from that, what does leadership mean to you?
It's a very personal thing, I think, and different people use different words, but for me, the essence of it is really around three things in terms of the person. I think it's all about bravery, I think it's about excitement, and I think it's about determination, all focused around creating change in an organisation. And obviously that change can vary hugely in terms of what's needed and what's appropriate. But for me, the change has got to be valuable to the organisation and to the world, and it's got to be sustainable. So leadership's about the kind of energies and skills that you bring to create change.
For the sake of the rest of this conversation, because I'd like to go into one area where you were a leader in a bit more detail, give us one context which would be useful to discuss leadership in.
Yeah, I think the one that would be most useful, because it certainly was my most impactful formative experiences when I was the CEO of BT Conferencing, BT, which was a standalone business, global business, running all of the teleconferencing and video conferencing services that BT provided to its customers.
What were some of the issues you faced in that leadership role?
There were several, and they changed over time because I was the leader there for 5 or 6 years. So when I first joined, the big issue that hit me in the face straight away was the organisation had grown fairly rapidly, but it had grown in a process way, so the customers had been forgotten. The purpose of the business was to run an efficient process, not to give the customers a satisfying experience. But the first issue was to remind people that the customers were top of the pile here. That if they're going to have a successful business, then that's where the focus would be, not internally. Then during the time, as we began to expand on the back of that kind of service ethic, we had to change the business from one that was really focused on supplying equipment, like video conferencing terminals, to a service business where we were running teleconferencing, audio conferencing and video conferencing services. So that was quite a big kind of system type change, if you like, process change internally. In parallel with all of that, we were expanding globally. Originally, it was a UK business when I took it over, and by the time I left, we were operating in 12 countries, and the US, being the biggest market, was coming up the rails, as it were, to chase the UK in terms of size.
I know you've talked about what you see the role of a leader is, but what did you see your role as a leader there, and what were some of the key indicators that you were doing a good job?
The key aspects of leadership there for me were, number one, to set the clear direction for everyone within the company. And there are different aspects of that, but overall you must have a handle on where you're aiming to take the organisation in both the short term and the long term, and you must clearly explain that to people, and you must be consistent on that every day, every week, every month. Now, over a year or so, of course, the market changes and things may change, but it's your responsibility to maintain an up-to-date vision and direction for the business. The next thing is to champion customers, as I mentioned before. In any reasonably sized organisation, the work we're doing now would suggest to us that an organisation of less than 20 people is pretty good on focusing on customers. But when you start getting bigger than that, the company and the internal processes can sometimes make people forget that the customers are the reason we exist. So maintaining being the customer's champion in an organisation of what was 700 people was important for the leader to do. But there are a couple of more internal things that I think are important for a leader to do. One is to remember that it's your role to help people through the changes that you're instigating. At the end of the day, change doesn't stick in an organisation unless the people are behind it, with it, and happy about it. And that's that's much more difficult than just announcing a reorganisation or whatever it is. You need to understand the psychology of the people in the organisation and how to make them feel comfortable with the ongoing changes. And then finally, and this is perhaps specific to the fact that we were an organisation within a bigger organisation, was to provide air cover. So that the politics and the pressures that exist within a bigger company that constantly try and distract a small organisation from its task, if the leader can deflect those, that's efficient use of the time rather than 700 people trying to deflect them.
In setting out that leadership role, what were the key resources that you had to help you achieve it?
There's lots of resources, but the more I thought about it at the time, and I have to say the more that I look back on it, only one resource really matters, and that's the people.
Just talk a little bit more about it. Why have you come to the conclusion that people are important?
You're right, everyone talks about it, but very few people do it in a way that I think is appropriate or effective in the long term. Why have I come to that conclusion? Because every time that we needed to make a big change, or a change happened without me instigating it, happened because someone had taken the initiative, someone had the commitment, someone had the belief to make it happen. Now, whether I triggered that in them or it was, self-determined and they'd made the decision themselves, the organisation moved on, the results improved when someone took responsibility and had belief in themselves to do it. The rest of the resources then were corralled, whether that was money, technology, whatever. The people brought those resources together and worked with the resources available. So I suppose, being the character I am, I observed it happening and therefore I believe it.
When you took that job as a leader, you said that you had a number of things, like being a customer champion, air cover, all the other good stuff that you've said. Did you have a sort of time plan? How did you work out what to cover first? What was your approach to time as far as that role is concerned?
The very first thing, a new leader in a new position, whether that's within a company where you've moved into a new role or perhaps when you're starting up an organisation, I think the very first thing you have to do is work on the relationship, your relationship with your people, and build up a trust. And that means spending a lot of time listening, talking, thinking before you open your mouth about future plans, so that you really understand. We would today call it kind of systems leadership. I think you understand all of the implications of something you're about to do on the whole system, on the whole community, and you've thought about that before you begin to initiate it, so that once you initiate it, you are cognizant and you're sympathetic to the repercussions of what you're about to do, and you're ready to help people through that. So that's the first thing always to do, is to take the time and the commitment to get close to your people.
How long do you think that takes to get to understand the people and the issues?
I think obviously you're right. You have to keep maintaining it. You can't just do it once and then forget about it. You have to maintain the relationship and the trust, and you have to work on that all the time. But I think the initial phase, getting people to know you and for you to know them, it varies with the size of the organisation. I think in a small organisation, less than 20 people, you could have one-to-ones with people 2 or 3 times within a month. And you've got a good relationship. I had 700 people there, so I would say it probably took 3 to 4 months before they really kind of felt comfortable with me and trusted me. And in that time, I spent an awful lot of time talking to the whole group, going to team meetings, having one-to-ones, just walking around the floor, chatting. And that can be quite a challenge to do sometimes. From a personal character point of view, I'm not the world's biggest extrovert, so that was a challenge for me to do that. And also, it's a challenge for people to accept you to do that, particularly if you're following a leader who kept their office door shut. The people can think, well, what's he up to? Why did he come and talk to us? So it can take a lot of effort and thick skin sometimes. You need to be a bit thick-skinned to sort of keep going at it, but you have to believe that it's the right thing to do.
The next set of questions sort of build on how you approach leadership. And the first one, where do you actually do it? Like, do you go out and meet people? Do you do it on the internet? Do you do it in your office? Do you do it in customers? Where, as a location, do you spend most of your time as a leader?
I think it varies a huge amount, actually. Well, what I mean by that is you don't just spend your time doing one thing. You have to spend your time doing a lot of things. So it's all those things you mentioned. It's definitely not just sending out emails to people. It definitely is talking to people one-to-one, face-to-face, in as many situations as you can that are relaxed for them. And it is definitely being out with customers alongside your people, not on your own, but alongside your people, being their help so they can see how you interact with customers and the kind of questions and conversations you have with customers, and you kind of role model partnering with customers, as I would call them.
What would you say one of your key behaviours as a leader? What do you actually spend most of your time on?
I think behaviours are slightly dependent on your personal style. And a lot of what we spend our time with people now is helping them understand their personal style, and that's good, but how to flex it as well. So for me personally, my behaviours that I try and exhibit, if you like, as a leader are around being calm. I'm not someone who gets flustered even in a crisis. I might internally, but I don't exude that. So I try and help people remain calm under stress. I try and be visionary. I never lose sight of the vision, so I quite frequently will move between helicopter vision and pragmatic, practical stuff, but I'll always bring it back to the helicopter view so that people know that what we're doing right now, what we're talking about right now, fits within the overall picture. And I think part of my style as well is to try really hard to listen a lot, whether that's to customers or to people. Now, part of that is a good thing to do because people like to be listened to, and they feel involved. But for me, it's really, really important to do, not just because of that, but to collect data on a situation. So I've got as many different perspectives on something before I make a decision about how to move forward. In fact, sometimes it could be argued, and my team have said to me, I listen for too long.
I have to ask you this. How did you learn some of the things that you're talking about?
I think the calmness is just it's a personal kind of genetic thing. I guess you could learn that, but I'm lucky in that, I've just got it. I don't tend to sort of get flustered quickly. The listening side of thing, I think I did learn. That was a learned behaviour. When I was kind of younger and ambitious and impatient to get on, I probably wasn't the world's best listener. Add to that I started in sales, which you would think you'd need to be a very good listener for, which indeed you do in front of the customer, but internally within the organisation I didn't spend a lot of time listening. So I guess I'm saying listen to the right people and just practice it. But listening skills are something that you can develop, and I still learn every day how to listen more effectively, and also how to filter what matters and what doesn't matter.
What do you believe about yourself as a leader?
I believe that I try and be a good leader. I really try very hard to do that. And what I mean by a good leader is about the ethics of leadership. I think it's really, really important to yourself and to others around you that you know and you are seen to be doing the right thing in a situation. And that can be like really big stuff, like you would only work for an organisation where there's a strong ethical basis for doing it, or perhaps more likely, I wouldn't work for an organisation where I felt the ethics of the products or the service were not right. That's one thing. And then bravery, I think, for a leader to be brave and to be committed and sustained in not backing off when things get difficult from a vision is really important. Now, of course, you could be panicking like mad internally and having all sorts of self-doubts, but you mustn't show that. And I try very hard to do that, even when chips are down. Keep calm, keep the vision in place, and it works. 90% of the time it works. That belief exudes and the situation resolves itself.
What do you believe about the people you're leading?
I believe they're all coming to work to do a great job. No one comes in to be awkward or difficult. It's the system that can distract people and upset them. And I believe everyone's got a huge energy that's just there to be released if you can give them the right environment to work in.
What is your vision or identity as a leader? Who is David when he's leading?
I think this varies the situation that you're in, but I think generally people would say David is someone who has a clear vision for the business and is good at setting strategy and ensuring that all paths lead towards it. I think my ability to flex my style to the situation is also something that is part of my identity as a leader. I can be quite flexible in terms of interacting with people of quite varied personal styles of their own.
If you had to choose somebody to replace you in that particular role, how would you know who to choose?
If I was in the happy situation that I had to choose, there was a candidate within the immediate team, if you like, i.e. someone coming up through the ranks, I would have observed that person both trusting the people in the organisation and being trusted by them, and demonstrating a lot of energy to drive things forward. If I was interviewing people that I didn't know, then I would be digging deeply to understand how they, one, created visions and were brave to follow those visions in difficult situations, and two, how indeed they generate trust in other people around them and whether they trust other people around them. And that's quite a difficult thing to explain, but it becomes intuitive, and you just know if someone is an honest, straightforward, energetic, visionary person. And early on in life you can be deceived in interviews, but I think you develop a sixth sense, don't you, after a few years' experience.
Okay, strange question, but I'm fascinated by your response to it. If you were to describe leadership as a metaphor with cartoon characters or fairy tale characters or animals or anything from your imagination, how would you describe the relationship between a leader and the people he was leading?
I think this one's a bit situational. I'll just give you an example, going back to BT conferencing. The leader that preceded me and the leader that followed from me, we were all three completely different people, and we all had very different relationships with our team. But we were all right at the stage that we led that business. The guy before me was startup merchant, and he did everything you expect a startup CEO to do. I was in the kind of innovation and growth phase, and then after I left, the business had to mature to some degree and put more processes and systems in place. So three different people with different relationships with their team. But if I were to generalise, the kind of cartoon character that I would feel engaged with was in Lion King, with the lion leading the animals into the future, but also in the process training up the future leader and knowing when to hand over. The other leader that I love is not a cartoon character, but is Tom Hanks in Apollo 13. I just think that film is a brilliant illustration of how a good leader and a good team can pull you through.